So, you might think the G-Wagon was just some corporate cash grab cooked up in a boardroom to sell luxury SUVs, but the real story is way crazier than that. So, grab a coffee, settle in, because this is everything you need to know about the G-Wagon. The story actually kicks off in the early 70s with the Shah of Iran. At the time, this guy was a major shareholder in Daimler-Benz, and he had a very specific problem. He needed a military vehicle that could handle the rugged Iranian borders, hunt in the desert, and basically survive the apocalypse. So he turned to Mercedes and basically said, "Build me the ultimate military off-roader." Here's the kicker though. Mercedes was the king of luxury sedans and massive commercial haulers, but they didn't really have a factory set up for a nimble 4x4. So they looked to their neighbors in Austria and teamed up with Steyr Daimler-Puch. In 1972, they formed a joint venture, and the deal was simple. Mercedes handled the design and engines, and Steyr handled the chassis and manufacturing. And the testing? It was absolutely brutal. They dragged the prototypes through German coal fields, baked them in the Sahara, froze them in the Arctic, and beat them to death on the mountains. By 1975, they were ready to roll. But then, history threw a massive wrench in the gears. Just as production was ramping up, a revolution hit Iran in 1979. The Shah was ousted, and the new government immediately canceled the order for the 20,000 units the Shah had promised to buy. Can you imagine the panic at Mercedes? They had a brand new factory and a car for a customer who didn't exist anymore. So they did the only smart thing they could. They pivoted. They decided to market this military beast to civilians and other armies, launching it in 1979 as the G model. And thank goodness they did, because if that order hadn't been canceled, we might never have gotten one of the coolest cars in history. Alright, let's talk about the absolute OG, the first generation W460. If you jump out of a modern G-Wagon and hop straight into one of these, you're going to feel like you've been teleported to a completely different universe. You have to understand that it wasn't a luxury car. It was a tool, basically a tractor that happened to have windows. When it launched in 1979, you had three body styles: a short wheelbase wagon, a long wheelbase four-door, and a short wheelbase convertible, which, by the way, is just super cool. Inside, you can forget about Napa leather or ambient lighting. You got fabric seats, a metal dashboard, and rubber mats, all designed so you could literally hose the interior out. The windows were hand-cranked, AC was a rare luxury, and the whole experience was loud, rough, and unapologetically honest. I personally love the charm of these early models because they feel indestructible. You know that feeling when you hold a really high-quality industrial power tool? That is exactly what driving one feels like. The real magic, though, was happening underneath the metal. It introduced a four-wheel drive system that really set the benchmark for off-roaders. It used a part-time four-wheel drive setup where you drive and rear-wheel drive on the street and pull a lever to engage the front axle when things got slippery. But the absolute party piece was the differentials. It featured mechanically locking differentials on both the front and rear axles, which is a huge deal. In a normal 4x4, power takes the path of least resistance, so if one wheel is in the air, it just spins uselessly while you go nowhere. But with this, you could just physically lock the axles, forcing both wheels to turn at the same speed. That meant if you had even one wheel with traction, you were moving. It gave the truck a climbing ability of up to 80%, making it virtually unstoppable. Now, here is the funny part. For all that toughness, it was agonizingly slow. I mean, you could practically outrun it on a bicycle because they used passenger car engines tuned for reliability rather than speed. You have to hear these specs to believe them because the numbers are hilariously low by modern standards. On the petrol side, you had the 230G, a 2.3-liter inline-4 pumping out a modest 102 horsepower and 127 pound-feet of torque. topping out around 84 miles per hour. The big dog was the 280 GE, a 2.8-liter inline-six managing 156 horsepower and 166 pound-feet, almost cracking triple digits with a top speed of 96 miles per hour. But the diesels? That's where patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a requirement. The 240 GD used a 2.4-liter inline-4 to make just 72 horsepower and 100 pound-feet of torque with a top speed of only 68 miles per hour. You were basically driving a brick wall. The 0 to 60 time was measured in maybe eventually, with some saying it took over 30 seconds to hit highway speeds. Then there was the legendary 300 GD with the 3-liter 5-cylinder engine. While unkillable, it only offered 88 horses and 125 pound-feet of torque. However, these engines were bulletproof, capable of running on terrible fuel and lasting forever. There's even a story of a couple who put over 500,000 miles on theirs, basically driving the distance to the moon and back. Despite being slow, it became a massive cultural icon. In 1980, the Vatican commissioned a special G-Wagon for Pope John Paul II featuring a clear thermoplastic dome so he could stand and wave to the crowds. They called it the Pope-mobile, and it showed the world that if this truck was safe enough for the Pope, it was safe enough for your family. On the total opposite end of the spectrum, you had the Paris-Dakar Rally. In 1983, Jackie Ickx and Claude Brasseur actually won the Dakar Rally in a modified 280 GE. This proved that the G-Wagon wasn't just a slow farm truck. With the right tuning, it could conquer the toughest race on Earth. For almost 30 years, the W463 generation wasn't just a car. It was the definitive G-Class that took this thing from a utilitarian military box and turned it into the celebrity status symbol we know today. The secret sauce? Mercedes realized we just wanted massive engines. It all started back in '93 with the 500 GE, a super limited run of just 446 cars packing a 5-liter V8. The engine was actually so cramped in there that they couldn't fit the front-locking differential, making it one of the rare G-Wagons with only 2 lockers. But even though it cost double the price of the 6-cylinder version, it sold out instantly. That was the proof Mercedes needed that people were desperate for power. The crazy part is, if you lived in the US, you couldn't even buy these officially for the first 2 decades. It wasn't until Mercedes saw how many H2 Hummers and Range Rovers were selling that they finally brought the G-Class to America officially in 2002. Once the G-Class hit the States, the AMG era kicked off and things got properly insane. We got the naturally aspirated G55 in 1999, but the real icon was the G55 compressor in 2004. That supercharged beast put out 500 horses and sounded like a dragster. And honestly, driving it is a violent experience. The suspension is rock hard, the steering is heavy, and hitting 60 miles per hour in 5.5 seconds in a literal brick is terrifying. By 2012, we got the rapper's delight, the G63, which switched to a smoother 5.5-liter twin-turbo V8, making 571 horses. But if you really hated money, you bought the $300,000 G65 AMG. They somehow shoehorned a massive 6-liter twin-turbo V12, and it made 612 horsepower with an insane 738 pound-feet of torque. Because that V12 was so heavy, it was actually slower to 60 than the V8. But nobody cared. It was all about the flex of that V12 badge. Just when we thought Mercedes couldn't possibly make the G-Wagon any wilder, they dropped the mic in 2013 with the G63 AMG 6x6. Originally built for the Australian Army, this thing is nearly 19 feet long and uses portal axles, where the gearbox drives the wheels from the top to give it a massive 18 inches of ground clearance. It cost over $500,000, had 5 locking diffs, and even featured an onboard tire inflation system so you could adjust for sand without getting out. It was the ultimate flex, which eventually led to the G500 4x4 squared. Think of that as the 6x6 minus 2 wheels. It kept the portal axles and the insane height, plus they offered it in neon colors to make it look like a factory-built monster truck. And that brings us right into the electric era. In 2024, Mercedes finally dropped the G580 with EQ technology. You'll notice they deliberately avoided calling it the EQG for the production model, probably because they really wanted to drive home the point that this is still a proper G-Class at heart. Now, does an electric G-Wagon actually make sense? Honestly, yes and no. The aerodynamics are still basically a brick. So even with a massive 116 kilowatt-hour battery, you're only getting around 240 miles of range. But when you take it off-road, it is an absolute beast. Under the skin, this thing is running 4 individual electric motors, one for each wheel. That means you don't need traditional mechanical differentials anymore. Instead, it uses virtual differential locks through torque vectoring. Basically, if the computer senses a wheel slipping, it just cuts power to that specific corner instantly. The output is insane, too, with 579 horsepower and a ridiculous 859 pound-feet of torque. But honestly, the coolest party trick has to be the G-turn. Since every wheel has its own motor, the car can spin the left wheels forward and the right wheels backward, letting you do a full 360-degree tank turn right on the spot. Can you imagine pulling that off in a parking lot? I mean, please don't, because you will absolutely shred your tires, but it is awesome for off-roading. It also features G-steering, which drags the inside rear wheel to help you make tighter turns on narrow trails. And since there's no engine noise, Mercedes added something called G-roar. It's a fake hum that mimics a V8 to give you some auditory feedback. You might hate it or you might love it, but it shows they're really trying to keep the soul of the car alive. Here's my honest take on the G-Wagon. It is a total anomaly that probably shouldn't even exist because it's way too heavy, completely square, and ridiculously expensive. But that is exactly why it's perfect. So I'm curious, would you guys pick the classic V8 or the new silent electric one? Let me know what you think.